biting opponents, drug testing fails, and brawls. All of these have cost UFC fighters some pretty hefty fines and time outside the ring. From a mere $2,000 fine all the way up to a staggering $2 million, fighters have been punished for everything from post-fight chaos to bizarre in-cage antics. Some broke rules, others broke the core for what martial arts stood for, but all of them paid for it one way or another. Let's break down the biggest fines in UFC history, ranked from the smallest slap on the wrist to record-breaking fines that have seen fighters forking out millions. The smallest and the most recent fine worth mentioning was for biting another fighter during a UFC bout. No, this isn't boxing in the 90s. Severino, in his very first UFC fight, decided to clamp down on Andre Lima's arm mid-scramble. The ref caught it immediately and ended the fight on the spot. DQ loss, public backlash, and a $2,000 fine, courtesy of the Nevada State Athletic Commission. Oh, and the UFC? They cut him that night. That's how fast your career can disappear. But not everything turned out bad. Andre Lima, the guy who got bitten, turned it into a win. He had the bite mark tattooed on his bicep, immortalizing one of the weirdest moments in UFC history. Dana White, he thought it was hilarious. So hilarious, in fact, that he gave Lima a post-fight bonus for handling it like a champ. You know how sometimes emotions can get the better of you? Well, that's what happened at UFC 244. Corey Anderson came in with something to prove, and boy oh boy did he prove it fast. He made quick work of Johnny Walker in the first round, shutting down all the hype that was building up around the Brazilian fighter. But then he let the adrenaline take over. Anderson started celebrating a bit too much, screaming at Walker, taunting the crowd, and even shoving the referee who tried to calm him down. Yeah, a bit too much, but he did later apologize to Walker and the fans. And he still got to hold on to his $50K performance bonus. So not a bad night for Corey, all things considered. Tim Sylvia was one of the first fighters to get busted during the UFC's slow pivot towards stricter drug policies. After defeating Gan McGee at UFC 44 and retaining his heavyweight belt, Sylvia tested positive for anabolic steroids in a post-fight drug test. The results sent shockwaves through the division. To his credit, Sylvia didn't try to hide it too much. He admitted, apologized, and voluntarily gave up the heavyweight title before the UFC could strip him. But it didn't save him from punishment. The Nevada State Athletic Commission fined him $10,000 and handed down a 6-month suspension. In hindsight, Sylvia's honesty likely softened the blow, but the incident still marked a turning point in how the UFC handled performance-enhancing drugs. From that point on, the UFC started cracking down harder on ped use, at least when it suited them. Fighters like Sylvia paid the price early, but the system quickly learned to bend for their poster boys. At UFC 74, Babalu fought David Heath in a bout that was already heated before they even touched gloves. The bad blood was real. Heath had talked trash and Babalu came in with a grudge. He won the fight by anaconda choke, but once Heath tapped, Sobral decided he was going to strangle his opponent a bit more, just like the snake he was. The ref tried to get Sobral to let go of the choke, but he held on for just a few more seconds. Super necessary. And it crossed the line. That little act of defiance cost him $25,000. More than that, it cost him his job. The UFC cut him almost immediately. Dana White made it crystal clear. When a guy taps, you stop. You don't make it a statement. You don't turn it into a message. You show some damn control. This one's recent, UFC 300. Arman Tsarukyan was walking out for the biggest fight of his career, all fired up and soaking in the spotlight, but maybe got a bit too fired up. Mid-walkout, he took a swing at a fan. Apparently, the fan flipped off Arman just as he was passing him by. The dude must have had a punchable face to get Armand to throw hands into the crowd like it's WWE.
First round knockout, but he told us he will not be reckless in pursuit of a finish. Instead, it is all about getting his...
The Nevada State Athletic Commission didn't find it quite as theatrical. They handed him a $25,000 fine and a 9-month suspension. But here's the kicker. He got that suspension cut in half by starring in an anti-bullying PSA, because apparently sucker punching a fan is now an educational opportunity. When USADA showed up for a random drug test in 2014, Wanderlei Silva decided to do some road work. He ran away, straight up vanished. That move alone got him slapped with a $70,000 fine and what was initially a lifetime ban from competing in Nevada. The NSAC weren't playing. They were making an example out of one of the sport's most iconic legends. A judge later rolled back the lifetime part of the sentence, but the fine held firm. Wanderlei never fought in the UFC again. Whether it was the fine, the drama, or both, the axe murderer's exit from the UFC was as intense and chaotic as his fights. Conor is no stranger to getting fined for the he did outside the ring. The Diaz rivalry wasn't just fireworks in the cage. It spilled over into pressers, parking lots, and Twitter. But the most expensive moment came at the UFC 202 press conference, when McGregor launched bottles and cans at Diaz and his crew.
Conor!
The Nevada State Athletic Commission didn't care that it made great promo footage. They fined him $150,000 and handed him 50 hours of community service. That's a steep price for throwing water bottles, even if they were part of the fight hype. Later, it was lowered to $75K and 50 hours of community service. But who cares? Chump change for Conor, and it became one of those iconic McGregor moments. UFC 183, Diaz vs. Silva. Nick Diaz came to fight and test the NSAC's patience. Apparently, for some unknown reason, the NSAC wanted to test Diaz for drugs. Not sure why they thought he would be involved with something like that. But, oh well, he took 3 tests, 2 clean, 1 dirty. And guess which one the NSAC decided to go with? Yup, that was enough to fine him $165,000 and slap him with a 5-year suspension. For weed. Fans lost it. Fighters spoke out. Even people outside the sport backed Diaz. It felt like the commission was using him as an example. Eventually, they trimmed the sentence, but the fine stuck. We all know Jones is no stranger to trouble. John Jones had his license revoked and received a hefty $205,000 fine from the California State Athletic Commission after testing positive for a banned substance prior to his win over Daniel Cormier at UFC 214. It wasn't Jones's first run-in with USADA either, nor his last. He had already served a 1-year suspension for a separate violation in 2016, but this time the hammer came down harder. The CSAC's fine and license revocation were just step 1. USADA was also eyeing a much longer suspension. The whole thing also put a dream fight between Jones and Brock Lesnar in serious jeopardy. Jones had called out Lesnar after beating Cormier, dropping the now famous line, "Brock Lesnar, if you want to know what it feels like to get your by a guy who weighs 40 pounds less than you, meet me in the octagon."
Brock Lesnar! If you want to know what it feels like to get by a guy who weighs 40 pounds less than you, meet me in the octagon.
But Lesnar never came back, and Jones had another mountain to climb. One built from drug test failures, suspensions, and now the biggest fine of his career. Good old Jones. UFC 229. Khabib absolutely broke McGregor. 4 rounds of control, a neck crank finish, and a smirk that said, "I own you." Then he climbed the cage and went to check Dylan Dennis's grappling.
He go to the do what is this brother?
Granby roll.
Black belt? Who give him that? We have to check that moment.
Setting off a brawl that made global headlines. It was something to behold.
Head spinning finish Conor McGregor tonight.
The NSAC hit him with the biggest fine in UFC post-fight history, $2 million. They also gave him a 9-month suspension. But if you ask Khabib or his fans, it was worth every penny. He settled the score inside the cage, then made sure the message echoed outside of it.
They fined Khabib. No, Khabib got fined $2 million.
If you love the UFC antics, remember to subscribe and hit the bell to stay up to date with everything MMA.